Episode 8, The Herald of Fire, ****. King Sharfan sat brooding in his cold throne room, surrounded by stone walls and the howling wind seeping through tall windows. Behind his sharp, dark eyes, a disturbing realization crept into his mind. Iran was no longer a scattered cluster of tribes that could be ignored. Their recent victories and skirmishes, their success in defending their lands from sudden assaults, and above all, the emergence of a young man named Azfaran had redrawn the balance of power in Central Ice. "He's no ordinary boy," Sharfan muttered under his breath, words meant only for himself. "He reminds me of Salim, but with a different fire." In the strategy room, his advisors gathered. A map lay sprawled, with red lines and tiny flags marking the last known positions of Sharfan's troops. One advisor proposed a new tactic, sending an envoy of peace. But Sharfan knew too well, there was no such thing as genuine peace. It was merely a game of time, and if played right, Irondale could be tamed once more. The chosen envoy was a young nobleman named Zahil, known for his eloquence and a face that never betrayed his true intent. He was sent not only to bear a message of peace, but also a veiled threat. "Submit, or war shall scorch your soil." Zahil rode a black horse as he entered the borderlands of Arendelle. He was met with wariness. There were no musical welcomes, no warm smiles, only cold stares from fully armed guards. He was escorted to Anveld, the administrative center of the tribes, now slowly organizing under a single influence, Azfaran. Anveld was no great city, but it was brimming with spirit and discipline. Streets once muddy were now paved. Wells had been built across the land, and the fields boasted proud harvests. Zahil noted everything in his mind. This was no longer a wild land. In the main council chamber, Azfaran sat among the tribal elders. His presence was no longer foreign. The young man now stood as their equal, not by blood, but by deeds. He welcomed Zahil with calm yet unyielding demeanor. "Greetings from King Sharfan of Isvalon," said Zahil, with a thin smile. "He wishes to end this misunderstanding and rebuild the old bridges between brothers." Azfaran responded with steady, unblinking eyes. "And what form would that bridge take? We see no river in need of crossing, except blood." The dialogue went long. Zahil offered alliances, trade, and protection from other threats he claimed were rising in the north. Yet all was delivered in tones too smooth. The seasoned elders could smell the threat behind every word. "And if we refuse?" Azfaran finally asked. Zahil's face remained composed, but his voice grew slightly firmer. "Then we shall consider. You have closed the doors to peace, and our king does not knock twice." Zahil was given a place to stay that night, but strict guards surrounded him. In the quiet of night, the elders reconvened. Some considered the offer. Others recalled past betrayals by Isvalon. Azfaran remained silent for a long time before finally speaking. "We will not let history repeat itself. We do not need protection from those who once burned our homes." The next morning, Zahil was escorted back to the border. He was given no definite answer, only the words, "We will consider your offer." But Sharfan was no fool. When Zahil reported the expressions and demeanor he had encountered, the king already knew the answer. Zahil stood before King Sharfan, his posture as composed as ever, despite the exhaustion that clung to him like the dust of the journey. The air in the throne room was heavy, as if awaiting the inevitable storm. Sharfan's gaze was unyielding, piercing Zahil with its intensity. Zahil did not flinch. "I bring the report, my king," Zahil said, his voice measured, yet carrying a certain weight of knowledge. Sharfan nodded, eyes never leaving his envoy. "Speak, Zahil. What did you see?" Zahil unrolled a map and placed it before the king. "Arendelle is not what it once was. The land is no longer scattered, disorganized. It is as if they are preparing for something greater." His finger traced the lines of the map, stopping at key locations. In Anveld, the streets are no longer muddy, but paved with stones. Wells have been dug across the land, across the whole of the border. This is a people preparing for the long term. They have no fear of famine, no fear of the elements. They have taken the land and turned it into something, ... Disciplined. Sharfan's jaw tightened, but he did not interrupt. Zahil continued, his tone growing more urgent. Azfaran has forged an order from chaos. The tribes are no longer fractured, but united. They answer to him, not by birth, but by the power of his deeds. And in their eyes, there is no submission, only defiance. He commands their respect, their loyalty. It is a different kind of fire than we saw before. Sharfan's fist clenched around the armrest of his throne, and the people, the common folk. Zahil's eyes narrowed slightly, a touch of bitterness creeping into his voice. They are not as fearful as they once were. They no longer cower. They hold their heads high. I saw children playing in the streets, their faces free from the weight of hunger. I saw farmers working their fields, their backs straight with pride. They are not the starving, wild people of old. They are organized, prepared, ... and they have forgotten their fear. The room fell silent for a long moment. Sharfan's eyes flickered with something dark, something that could not quite be hidden. And what of the negotiations? What was their response? Sharfan asked, though it was clear from his voice he already knew. They refused your offer outright, Zahil said, his voice cold now. Not with words, but with their silence. Their message was clear. They do not seek peace under your terms. Azfaran will not bend to Isvalon, and I do not believe they will ever bend again. Sharfan rose from his throne, his movements deliberate. The room seemed to grow colder, darker, as his anger simmered beneath the surface. He paced slowly, his thoughts churning. So they have chosen war, Sharfan muttered, more to himself than to Zahil. They believe they are ready. They believe they can stand against Isvalon. Zahil nodded. They will stand. But it will not be for long. Sharfan turned sharply to face his envoy, his eyes burning with a fierce resolve. Then we shall meet them, with fire. If they choose to stand, they will burn in the light of our wrath. And Sharr fan ... responded with fire. In the eastern skies, smoke rose once again. A small village on Irondale's border, home to cart builders, was torched by cavalry during the night. Flames devoured freshly grown fields, and children's cries mingled with the screams. Sharfan's message was painfully clear. Rejection is the beginning of ruin. In Anveld the news arrived before the sun rose high. Azfaran clutched the scout's report tightly. His face showed no panic, but the elders understood. This was the call to prepare. Negotiations are over, he said. They have chosen fire. Then we shall answer with a brighter light. The skies above Irondale turned red, not only from fire, but from the great decision taking root in a land once silent. In that stillness, Irondale rose toward the inevitable war. Episode 9, Ashes Beneath Our Feet, **** traces after the fire smoke still hung in the skies over Irondale, veiling the border village that now held nothing but rubble and memories. Amidst the ruins, the scent of iron and blood lingered, crafting an atmosphere thick with regret and fury. Where once laughter rang and interregional markets bustled, only dust and devastation remained. Everything here, buildings, roads, and the people, stood as silent witnesses to an attack that claimed more lives than could be counted. Azfaran walked slowly, each step weighed down. His eyes swept across every corner of the village, remembering those who had fallen. Burnt homes, crumbled buildings, each a stark image of suffering that could no longer be evaded. This was no longer about survival, nor about seeking shelter from unseen forces. This was a turning point, a moment where history would not just be guarded, but rewritten. Beneath Azfaran's feet, the ashes of battle were crushed with every step, forming tracks that would be remembered. This was a new beginning, yet also the beginning of greater sacrifice. War. Council meeting cracks within the underground hall. once a place of strategic discussion, now echoed with tense whispers. Candles flickered at every corner, casting long shadows on the walls. Atop a wide table strewn with maps, plans for a new offensive were taking shape. Azfaran sat at the head of the table, his face resolute but blank, as though lost in emotions, too vast to name. Marin sat beside him, her eyes sharp and watchful. The elders, representatives of Irindo's tribes, and even Caldrian, a young figure from Serindo, were present. Each carried their own burdens of worry and hope. All eyes were on Azfaran. He opened the council with a voice calm, yet heavy. "This is no longer about survival," he said quietly. "This is about changing our fate. It's about bringing justice to those who have fallen. What we have paid cannot be repaid in tears or spilled blood." Silence fell for a moment. Marin exhaled, then spoke carefully. "We must tread carefully, Azfaran. To strike in hatred would only prolong the suffering. Civilians will be the ones who suffer the most." The tribal representatives would not remain silent. One elder, his voice booming, declared their resolve. "We have held back long enough. Sharfan has destroyed us. Now is the time to strike and end this tyranny once and for all." Meanwhile, young Caldrian raised his hand, his voice anxious yet sincere. "There are other ways to end this, not by repaying evil with evil. If we retaliate, we become what Sharfan claims we are. We must hold on to our morality." But louder voices began to dominate, questioning whether morality had any place left in a war that had taken so many lives. Azfaran remained quiet, his gaze shifting from face to face. The tension was suffocating. A great decision hung in the air. "What we do next will determine the course of history," Azfaran finally said. "We will strike, but not with hatred. We will strike with honor." A glimpse from Isvalon's people. Isvalon, far from the chaos of the front lines, life moved forward beneath a dark shadow. Nazma, once a textile artisan, now worked as a cleaner in the hall, where Sharfan's soldiers gathered. Her life was steeped in fear and constant surveillance. Spies lurked in every corner, and whispers of a coming rebellion grew louder by the day. Nazma sat near a narrow window, staring at the dark sky. In her lap, her 8-year-old son, Kadir, sat quietly. His intelligent, curious eyes saw the world differently. Mother Kadir asked in a soft voice, "Why are people afraid of someone who's supposed to protect them?" Nazma paused, then answered in a near whisper, "Sometimes, those meant to protect us become the most dangerous. We live in a world where the strong rule over the weak." Kadir frowned, confusion plain on his face. "But we have our own land, Mother. Why should we be afraid?" Nazma could only look at her son with a heavy heart. "Sometimes, even the land can no longer save us." Their neighbor, an old man who walked with careful steps and had known Nazma from better days, arrived with a whisper of hope. "The eastern wind is stirring," he said in a low but meaningful tone. "Change is coming, Nazma, and that change might come from beyond, bearing fresh winds." The kitchen of resistance news of the recent success of the Irindale slave rescue mission had spread quickly through the society of Isk. The news was like a fire that burned in the hearts of many, creating hope and anxiety at the same time. In every corner of the market, in small, cramped houses, even in the fields where the farmers worked, the story was being spoken with hushed tones filled with awe and hope. Although the news had come through unofficial channels, Irindale's success in freeing those captured by Sharfan brought a new light to those who had long been oppressed in darkness. Father, a former royal guard, now living in exile, could not ignore the impact of this news. The success not only brought hope, but it also sparked within him the realization that a new force was rising, something he had long awaited, a chance to fight against a tyranny that had been rampant, even though he had been in hiding for so long. His sense of responsibility toward his homeland and the fallen kingdom once again stirred within him. On a quiet night, in the back kitchen of a small house in Isvalon, Father gathered a group of trusted individuals. They were those who, in secret, had begun to feel that the time had come for resistance to begin. On the simple wooden table, Father started the conversation, with a statement that shook the hearts of those present. We can no longer live in the shadows, waiting for those stronger than us to act, Father said, his voice firm, though his lips trembled slightly. Arendelle has shown that they are capable of acting. Now it's time for us to do something. We need to send a message to them. Father rolled up an old piece of paper and wrote down secret codes that could only be understood by those involved in this small network. This was not just a message. It was a declaration that even though Isvalon was under the rule of Azfaran, there were parts of the people who still wanted to fight. One of the group members, a merchant named Nora, looked at Father with eyes full of doubt. How can we be sure they will hear us? She asked. We've been under their surveillance for so long. What can we do to make our voices heard? Father smiled faintly, realizing that such concerns were indeed natural. Arendelle is listening to our voices. They know that change is coming here. We just need to give them further clues, and this is the first step. Information is our weapon. In Father's hands, the codes were not just a way to send a message, but a symbol of hope. Hope that their struggle for freedom, though small, would echo far beyond Isvalon. And on that night, in the darkness that enveloped Isvalon, a small network began to form. A network that would connect those brave enough to stand against injustice and bring new hope into a world that had long been trapped in darkness. Arendelle, Azfaran, and the night of Decision Night had fallen at the palace of Arendelle, stood on a balcony overlooking the village ruins where a bonfire burned steadily. That fire seemed to symbolize a battle never truly extinguished, even if its bodies had long turned to ash. Maer unapproached and stood beside him. Azfaran, she said, voice full of worry. Do you want to be a conqueror or a liberator? Azfaran didn't respond at once. He looked at his hands, stained with ash and blood, as though searching for an answer in their lines. I don't know anymore, he said at last, voice hoarse. It all feels like an inescapable fate. Marin looked at him with deep understanding. Your choice will shape who you are. Remember, we don't just fight for land, we fight for our souls. Azfaran said nothing more. He wrote something down in his journal, a note marking the beginning of a new plan, a strike with honor, not blind revenge, crafting a special strategy, steps in the shadows, in the stillness of night. A vital decision was made. Azfaran chose to form a small unit, not for attack, but for infiltration into Isvalon. Their mission, to assess the people's condition and seek signs of rebellion from within. They needed to understand the true face of their enemy. Marin would lead this mission with a covert diplomatic team bound for the borderlands, a risky maneuver. If we wish to end this, Azfaran said firmly, we must know who our enemy truly is. The decision sparked debate among the leaders, but Azfaran stood resolute. This was no longer about destruction, but about opening a path to peace amidst war. Two worlds, one Fatanazma, lay beside Kadir, lulling him to sleep with stories of Isvalon's past before Sharfan's reign. We once lived in peace, she said. Our land was fertile, and everyone could smile. In Arendelle, Azfaran stood among troops ready to march. Their faces were determined, yet anxious. They knew the war was far from over. They knew they carried hope, but also destruction. The episode closed with parallel narration. From Nazma's side, we want to live, not be anyone's tool. And from Azfaran's, we bring hope, not destruction. In the night sky, two birds crossed, the borderlands, symbols of two worlds, not yet fully understood by one another. Episode 10, The Forge of Resistance, ***, the rhythm of iron and wood morning. Mist slowly descended from the slopes of empty Getty, cloaking the pine forest like a damp blanket. Yet, behind that fog, the clanging of iron and the creak of saws broke the silence. Arendelle was no longer asleep. Hidden deep in the forest, between cliffs and ancient roots, stood a workshop, not grand, but strong. Straw-roof tents concealed the activities inside. Blacksmiths, engineers, carpenters, even a few former thieves, now carving siege ladders. A battering ram was taking shape. A massive wooden log mounted on an iron axis, bound with Highland fiber ropes. Folding ladders were designed to be pulled with a single motion. An old technician, his hands scarred by old burns, drew blueprints in the sand. Around him, young men took notes. "You think this tool will break the main gate?" asked one. The old man just chuckled. "It's not the tool that breaks it, it's the conviction behind it." From a nearby hilltop, Azfaran observed in silence. The wind tugged at his cloak. He murmured, "Rise, Erindale. This is more than a war. This is the call of history." The mountain cavalry to the west, the rocky terrain became the training ground for horse riders. Mountain cavalry were trained to move swiftly through narrow paths, make sharp turns, and ambush from above. A horse neighed as a young man lost his balance. He fell, groaning in pain. A grizzled veteran with silver hair lifted him. "Know why I'm not angry?" asked the veteran. "Because I'm still learning." "No, because you fell before the enemy could bring you down. That's how you live longer." Among them, soldiers began to understand respect, not from orders, but from bruises. Between drills, they dressed each other's wounds, shared food, laughed despite gasping breaths. A young female rider stopped beside Azfaran, who was scribbling something in his notebook. "What are you writing?" "Probabilities of victory," Azfaran replied without looking up. She smiled. "Write one, for us too." "I already did. You're in the first paragraph." Natural obstacles and tensions. The next morning, the ground trembled. Overnight rain had triggered a minor landslide on the western slope. Shouts echoed as a dozen horses fled into the woods. Several engineers were injured, crushed by logs falling from the logistics trail. In the underground depot, a woman named Sharon, the head of logistics, was in a heated argument with the chief technician. "I need 6 carts to deliver food to the front," she shouted, "and I need 7 to move ladder frames before sundown." He snapped back. "If your soldiers starve, who'll climb your ladders? If the enemy gate stands, there'll be nothing to eat." Silence fell. Heavy breaths filled the room. Azfaran entered, his gaze sweeping across them. "I won't take sides, but I know this: war strips us bare. If we let it divide us now, we've already lost before crossing the river." They said nothing. Sharon nodded. The technician lowered his shoulders. "Give me 3 carts, and one of your men helps with logistics till nightfall," she offered. "Agreed," the technician replied. "On one condition: you join tomorrow's battering ram trial." They shared a faint laugh, a small victory amid the coming storm. Mission in Isvalon. Shadows that sneak in morning fog veiled the plains at Isvalon's border. Marin wore a coarse gray cloak, her face hidden beneath a wide hood, blending into a small caravan, posing as spice and fabric traders. 4 others accompanied her, 2 hired rogues as guards, an old woman with a basket of herbs, and a man on a donkey carrying trade documents. But they weren't traders. They were a diplomatic infiltration unit from Erindale, sent by Azfaran to take the pulse of Isvalon from within. Their mission was simple, yet perilous: gather evidence, find voices, seek hope. As they entered the border town, Marin studied the buildings, solid, yet riddled with cracks. People moved quickly, heads down, as if gazes could kill. The city's air wasn't just cold, it was suffocating. In a dilapidated inn, Marin recorded every patrol route, market hour, and guard movement. But their most vital intel came not from observation, but a seemingly random moment. An unexpected encounter that afternoon. Marin's group visited a Bakali market to trade some goods. Amid stacks of grains and worn fabrics, she spotted a woman with cautious eyes holding a boy's hand. The child's gaze was sharp, catching Marin's attention. The boy was Kadir, Nazma's son. Not recognition, but instinct. The boy's eyes seemed to see deeper than faces. Marin said nothing. But as the woman Nazma passed by, she heard a whisper, nearly drowned in the market's noise. "There's a place north, beneath the old tower. If you seek direction, Go after nightfall. Marin didn't react. She knew well how covert messages worked. That evening, they retreated quietly to their collapsing and loft and waited for darkness. The meeting point, a tower that whispers rebellion near midnight. They crept through narrow alleys toward a ruined watchtower, abandoned for being. Inside was only broken stone and a spiral stair, but enough to shelter conspiracy. There, by the dim light of a torch, stood 3 people. Among them was Nasma, beside a sharp-eyed older man. Father. Marin removed her hood. No words wasted. Irindel hears your voice, she said softly, firmly. Father stared at her, measuring whether this was truth or a trap. We no longer wait for miracles, he finally said. But if you bring more than hope, if you bring a plan, we're ready to talk. From the shadows, Nora emerged, watching Marin with a mix of suspicion and hope. Behind them, 2 young men carried worn scrolls and old maps, proof that plans had been laid for a long time, waiting for a spark. Key Dialoga Maran sat cross-legged on the stone floor, pulling a small map from her belt. Sharfan thinks his people are still afraid, but you all are not the same people anymore, she said. We're not here to save you. We're here to join your voice. Father stepped closer, staring into her. We've lost homes, names, parts of our souls. All we have left is courage. But courage without direction is destruction. We need a sign. Marin smiled faintly. She pulled a carved wooden token from her pouch, a symbol combining the border, tribe of Irindale, and ancient Isvalon motifs. The sign has already been sent. Now we just need to open the path. That night's meeting was a turning point, not just because of the intel exchanged, but because for the first time, 2 fronts of resistance began to unite. No longer just from the inside or the outside, but both. As they parted before dawn, Father said to Marin, if this works, our children will read of you not as bringers of war, but openers of freedom doors. Marin gazed at the fading stars. In her heart, she knew this dawn belonged not just to Isvalon, but to Irindale, to Azfaran, and his wall of decisions. The following night, Azfaran stood atop the eastern wall of the fortress, wearing a heavy cloak. Below, the workshop lights still burned. In the distance, shadows of cavalry returning from drills flickered. In his hand, a letter addressed to his grandfather, King Salim. He read it silently. Grandfather, I now understand why grandmother never spoke much of war. Not because she forgot, but because such wounds aren't meant to be remembered, only healed through the future. I'm afraid, not of dying, but of failing to protect the hope rising from these ruins. Footsteps approached. Marin appeared, weary, her coat damp. We made contact, but time is tight. Delay more than 3 weeks, and the inner rebellion may wither. How many support us? Asked Azfaran. Not many, but the few we have, they're ready to burn. Azfaran looked to the dark sky. He whispered, not to Marin, but to the world itself. If tonight is the last dark, then let us be the first fire. A resolve carved into wood. The next morning, after days of rain and rising tension, the first battering ram was completed. Its wooden frame reinforced with steel, and on its head, the symbol of Irindale's unity. Not a dragon, but a cracked stone still standing. The chief technician tapped the ram's side with his hammer. She may not speak, but if she could, she'd say, I was born from the storm. Laughter broke out. Even Sharon, arriving with a basket of bread, chuckled. Next day, in a screaming father opened a package disguised in spice wrappings. Inside, a single message written on a dry leaf. The fire from the west prepares to rise. 3 weeks from today, the wall shall echo from both sides. Father looked at his comrades. He raised the note. They're coming. We are not alone. Outside, the sun had not yet risen, but everyone knew light was on its way. Episode 11, The Fire Burning in Unity. The preparations for the great battle were becoming more refined, but it was precisely here that tension began to creep into their ranks. The barracks had been set up, the weapons prepared, and the weary soldiers waited for orders. However, like embers that appear calm on the surface, a hidden fire slowly ignited, ready to burn everything. Azfaran looked at the map spread out on the wooden table, his finger tracing the route that had been planned for their advance. Everything looked orderly, as if everything would go smoothly. But beneath it all, cracks in the leadership of the forces had begun to show. Even before the real battle had begun, doubt and personal ambition were demanding to be reckoned with. Maer, with a sharp gaze that couldn't be hidden, stood by the table, her eyes focused on the same map. She studied every detail of the terrain and made sharp calculations. A gradual siege, she said, her voice low but firm. That is the only way. We can't fight with just enthusiasm and hope. We must reduce the enemy's strength little by little, destroy them from within. Kale, the field commander, standing at the end of the table, couldn't contain his frustration. His lips curled upward, showing his disapproval. A siege, he said, almost sounding like mockery. That's too slow. We need to strike, hit them hard, do it fast, before they have time to build stronger defenses. If we wait too long, they'll build a higher wall. We need to act now. Marin turned her gaze toward Kale, tension in her eyes. Kale, this war is not that simple. Our united strength may be superior, but we don't know how many forces they have. We'll be trapped in a longer war if we choose a frontal assault. A siege is a wiser way to pressure them, bit by bit. Kale tilted his head, his gaze growing sharper. Wiser, or too cautious. We're on the brink of war, Marin. If we don't act fast, they'll move first, and we'll lose our chance. The atmosphere in the room grew tenser. Some officers present could only remain silent, trying to assess the debate. They knew who was more senior, who had more experience, but before them stood two very different viewpoints. Azfaran, who had remained quiet until then, finally lifted his gaze from the map. He looked at both of them with a hard-to-read expression. Enough, he said, his voice not too loud but enough to calm the growing noise. We can't keep getting stuck in this debate. Our time is limited. All eyes turned to him. Kale, who usually spoke more, was now silent. Marin, who tended to reflect before speaking, waited patiently, waiting for Azfaran's decision. Azfaran stood up from his chair and walked to the window, looking outside. If we continue to maintain these cracks, not only will we lose our opportunity, but our strength as well. Each commander here brings their own ambition and beliefs, but we must remember, we move not as individuals, we move as one unit. He paused for a moment, his eyes gazing at the hazy horizon. War is not just about strategy or tactics. It's about how we can overcome our own fears and how we can reconcile these differences to achieve one goal. Kale snorted, stepping forward, approaching Azfaran with a challenging look in his eyes. And what do you expect, King Azfaran? That all these differences will vanish just like that? You think we can settle this just by talking? Azfaran did not turn. No, he answered quietly. But we can learn to work together, even with our differences. Between them, Marin took a deep breath, trying to calm her turbulent mind. Is right, she said, her voice now softer. This war is more than just strategy. It's about how we can heal old wounds and how we can unite an army scattered in a battlefield full of hatred. Kale raised an eyebrow, not fully agreeing, but he knew Marin had a viewpoint that was not easily broken. He stared at Azfaran with a challenging gaze, as though waiting for a further answer. Azfaran turned around, his face showing exhaustion. We don't have the luxury of time to keep debating, Kale. All of this will determine our fate, but I choose to look beyond. We not only need to win this war, but we must also ensure that after the war, we can rebuild what has been destroyed. Kale lowered his gaze, as if starting to understand Azfaran's words. Though still doubtful, a part of him was touched by that statement. Yet, the burning resentment inside him could not be fully hidden. If we don't strike now, he said in a low voice, but with strong emphasis, we'll lose more than just an opportunity. We'll lose our honor. Azfaran looked at Kale with a serious expression. Honor is not something we earn simply by winning battles. Sometimes, to preserve honor, we must know when to act wisely. There was a prolonged silence in the room. Merrin looked at Kale with eyes full of understanding, though she knew the path they chose would not be easy. War is not just about strength, Azfaran continued, his voice now filled with determination. Victory is not just about a fast assault or a slow siege. It's about how we can bring this entire army toward one greater goal. It's about how we can overcome our differences and move together. Kale nodded slowly, though his expression remained tense. I understand, he said, though his voice sounded a little reluctant. But I still believe a frontal assault is the right way. And I believe the siege is the better way, Merrin replied, staring at Kale with unwavering confidence. Azfaran smiled, faintly, as if knowing there was no perfect solution. But as he had said before, it wasn't just about strategy. It was about how they overcame their differences and learned to work together. He stepped back from the map table and looked at both. Commanders, we'll take parts from both approaches. We'll do a siege, but with fast and precise steps. No single way will solve everything. We'll find the balance between the two. Merrin and Kale looked at each other. Though their debate was not over, they knew that Azfaran's decision was the best they could hope for in this increasingly difficult situation. All right, Kale said, finally accepting the decision. If that's what you choose, King, then we'll do it our way. Merrin nodded, though there was still doubt in her eyes. We'll prepare a more detailed plan. Azfaran looked at both of them with eyes full of hope. Remember, we're not just fighting against the enemy. We're fighting against our own fears. The three of them stood there, inside the simple tent, yet filled with unspoken burden. No one knew what would happen after this, but one thing was certain. This war would not only test their skills, but also test the strength of their unity. ****. Mental preparation of the troops a day after the heated meeting. Azfaran called all the military commanders into the main meeting room. His face was serious, but there was a firmness that couldn't be hidden behind his eyes. The commanders present immediately stood at attention when Azfaran entered the room. By the end of this week, Azfaran said in a commanding voice, all the forces must gather in and VLD there. We will receive supplies from the elders, king, and military commanders. Prepare your troops for that. I want you to ensure that every soldier is ready mentally, not just physically. The commanders nodded in respect, including Merrin and Kale, who still felt the tension of their unresolved debate. Kale turned to his troops. They had been waiting outside the meeting room, ready to hear his orders. With swift steps, Kale faced them. His voice was firm and full of spirit. We will gather in an. This is not just a meeting. This is the moment when we strengthen our resolve for what is to come. Do not let fear take over us. We are an army ready to face anything that comes. He looked into the eyes of each of his soldiers and with full confidence continued. Remember, every step we take is part of a greater victory. We fight together. We stand together. Merrin stood before another group of troops, her voice calmer but full of meaning. Anveld is not just a meeting place. It is where we strengthen our hearts. Do not only bring your bodies, bring your souls for this nation. We will face every challenge together. As the commanders went to their respective troops, Azfaran stood alone for a moment. His eyes gazed far ahead, feeling the weight of the responsibility that was fast approaching. But one thing he knew for sure, they could not retreat now. Azfaran looked at the soldiers beginning to march, realizing that every step they took was a test of unity that went beyond just battlefield tactics. Amidst the doubts and tensions that still lingered, he knew that there was no other choice but to move forward together in silence. He realized that, though their steps were heavy, they would not retreat. This war was not just about defending the land, but about the unity that would determine their fate. Episode 12, Cracks Behind the Walls, behind the mighty walls of Isvalon. The noise of drills and marching feet create an illusion of strength. Rows of soldiers moved with perfect discipline. The clang of weapons and synchronized steps echoed like a song of unity. But beneath that surface, something fragile stirred, not a weakness of steel or numbers, but a quiet splintering of belief. "Sometimes I wonder," whispered a young Isvalon soldier to his comrade while stacking shields inside the armory. "Is victory really worth more than the faces we'll never see again?" His comrade Covid turned slowly. His face was hardened like the earth in late autumn, but his eyes held the rain that never fell. "You're still thinking about that village, aren't you? The one near the river border?" The young soldier nodded subtly. "I grew up near there. We used to trade crops. My mother was once healed by one of their women. But yesterday, I saw their bodies scorched by the fire we lit ourselves." "Keep your voice down," Covid warned, though without malice. His grip on his sword tightened. "We can't talk like this." Yet even Covid wasn't immune. The same memories gnawed at him in silence: cries, smoke, and the acrid stench of burning flesh. His nights were riddled with dreams that left him gasping, unable to speak of them. In the shadows of the rear barracks, where laughter and shared prayers once echoed, new kinds of conversations began to grow like mold in damp wood. "Are we still human?" the young soldier asked one night, with only Covid for company. "Or are we just the fingers of a madman's omission?" Covid didn't answer immediately. Instead, he sat heavily on a wooden crate, eyes blank as he started at the flag hanging across the wall. Azfaran. He never sees the faces we kill. To him, it's just numbers and war games. Outside, the thundering of war drums continued. "There," Commander barked commands with a thunderous voice, as if the sound alone could drown out the doubts blooming among the ranks. "Train until sweat drains your body. Better that than bleeding on the field," shouted Commander Bagir. But in the pauses between commands, some eyes turned toward the ground. Some feet hesitated in their steps. A splinter of uncertainty had pierced through armor. If this is truly for Isvalon, Covid pondered during formation, his step lagging for half a heartbeat. "Why does it feel like we're slowly burning ourselves alive?" An older soldier nearby noticed and muttered under his breath, "We all know, lad." But knowing and daring, Tiak, those are two different things. Up above, on the tower's balcony, Azfaran stood still, his eyes scanning the horizon. Smoke curled faintly from the far edges of the west, clearly from Arundel's war drills. No unease marred his face, only a thin smile of someone who believed the outcome was already decided. "Let them come," he murmured. "The more they strike, the deeper they fall into the trap I've prepared." Behind him, Zahil, his cold and cunning advisors, delivered his report. "There are murmurs, my lord," whispers of doubt among the soldiers. Azfaran turned sharply, his expression hardened like chiseled stone. "Cut out any tongue that whispers. A spark can grow into a wildfire if left alone." Still, his command could not erase the guilt taking root below. In a forgotten corner beneath the barracks, a soldier had scribbled on the wall with charcoal, not plans of rebellion, but a poem. "If this land is washed by blood that does not deserve it, then history will not call us heroes, but ghosts haunting the memories of orphaned children." Another soldier read it in silence, tracing the word orphaned with trembling fingers. He did not erase it. He knew it to be true. As the drills resumed, a coldness crept among them, not of the wind, but of conviction slowly eroding. "Are we still on the right side of this war?" asked a weary young soldier during their evening rest. Asking questions like that, his senior replied, "can make you disappear. But I wonder too." Doubt spread like hairline cracks across a sheet of glass, and with the distant drums of Arundel growing louder by the day, more soldiers began to question what they were really fighting for. Back in the strategy room, Azfaran stabbed a dagger to the map. "They'll attack from the west. We'll be ready. We strike first. We cut off the dragon's head before it breathes." The commanders around him nodded. but some shared glances, subtle, uncertain. They stood tall, but their eyes had lost their fire. In the hallway behind, Covid heard whispers from a soldier passing by. "It won't be long now. This burden is too heavy for our hearts." Covid replied quietly, "If war comes, I don't know who I'll kill, the enemy or myself." The smoke on the horizon thickened, Irondale's preparations rising in defiance. And though most of Isvalan's troops remained sharp and unwavering, a quiet war had already begun inside a few of them. What they didn't know, what none of the generals knew, was how close some were to breaking Zahil's hidden thread. While drills continued and formations held strong, Zahil moved through the halls like a shadow. He watched everything, but his eyes saw only what served him. "The ranks hold steady," reported one officer. Zahil nodded, but his lips curled into a faint sneer. "Of course they do," he muttered, more to himself. "Fear is the glue, and fear, my friend, sticks tighter than loyalty." In secret, Zahil had begun preparing contingency measures, not out of fear of Irondale, but of weakness within. He had ordered secret surveillance on certain soldiers, especially those who served in the border villages. "You think they will break?" one of his spies asked. "They already have," Zahil answered coldly. "But their bones still move. That is all that matters." In private, Zahil kept a ledger of names, soldiers marked not as traitors, but as unstable. His plan was not to counsel them, but to discard them at the right time, quietly, efficiently. Yet, he never reported these findings to Azfaran, to the tyrant ruler. Everything was perfect. Zahil preferred it that way. He needed delusions intact, because in them, Zahil could act freely. "Let the cracks widen," he whispered one night as he dipped his pen in ink. "Cracks make perfect places to plant poison." Unseen by the rest, Zahil's true allegiance was not to Sharfanor, it was to control, pure, absolute control. The war ahead, to him, was just another theater. And as the night deepened and war drums echoed faintly from Arendelle, Zahil looked out the window with a smirk. "Let them burn," he murmured. "In fire, new shapes are forged." Behind him, the soldiers trained and sweated, oblivious. The commanders barked, the drums beat, and a young soldier whispered a prayer he wasn't sure should reach the sky. No one knew what cracked deeper that week, the stone beneath their boots, or the hearts that still beat behind the armor. And so, Isvalon marched on, uniform in shape, fractured in soul,